Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
All right, so David, Google and the DMA,
Yes,
and
so Google, Google. When did they write this blog post? April 5th.
This
So
Friday.
earlier, Friday of last week, I guess.
Yeah.
Adam Cohen, who's their director of economic policy, which I presume means chief internal lobbyist or something to that extent, wrote this, I would say, fairly predictable post, which Google sort of telegraphed this strategy pretty obviously in the workshop in Brussels that Mike and I attended around their DMA compliance. DMA, Digital Markets Act, for those who aren't familiar, regulation in Europe that is looking at 6 companies, all the usual suspects: Google, Apple, Microsoft, the big tech companies. And for this audience, the sort of key provision is Article 6.5, which states that Google and other gatekeepers are not allowed to self-preference their own properties in their search results. So the EU announced about 2 weeks ago now, so well in advance of this blog post, that they had opened an investigation into Google in 3 categories. I think shopping, flights, and travel, shopping, flights, and hotels, something like that. And so Google's response is, hey, we're doing what's best for users. We've seen all of these complaints in various Reddit threads about people getting frustrated that they, can't click into Google Maps anymore. Hotels are complaining that their traffic is down 30%, since we introduced these changes. We shouldn't be forced to sort of arbitrate between suppliers and aggregators, direct suppliers being hotels and aggregators being directories. We shouldn't be forced to sort of arbitrate. People are always going to be complaining that they're getting less traffic from us. Well, and in particular, the part that I found super galling was one of their last lines, which is, we'll continue to be transparent about our DMA compliance obligations and the effects of overly rigid product mandates. Well, from where I sit, they're not being transparent at all. We asked them to supply click-through data about these various elements that they've introduced. They didn't do that. They said they would likely do it behind closed doors to the commissioners. And as far as I can tell, aside from a couple of very obvious self-preferencing product iterations, there aren't any overly rigid product mandates yet. And I don't think anybody is actually calling for those. They're just saying, stop preferencing your own results at the top of every search.
Well, in fact, Google set up this battle by creating links as the primary compliance, which do effectively create this conflict. But links are not necessarily the only way to solve this, or probably not even the best way to solve the non-preferencing problem.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that struck me, is that there's a kind of false dichotomy here between the Google's compliance changes, which were not mandated by anybody. Google came up with them themselves, and then the past, the way things were. And so they're saying, well, we've got this new situation, which isn't very good for suppliers, and we've got the old situation, which is better for everybody. And, so the DMA is having all these negative consequences. And I think it's a completely false dichotomy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's essentially lazy product management on Google's part. If you're saying,
that's a generous interpretation, David.
Well, right. But our users don't like these changes. Well, guess what? Come up with some better changes, because you are subject to this law. And if it's true that people actually don't like them, then it's time to go back to the drawing board, is what I would say. So, and again, we have not seen in our fairly limited research thus far. We're eager to continue that research in other verticals, but we've not seen much evidence to suggest that people are dramatically changing their behavior anyway. So it seems like a bit of a red herring at this point, but Google's sort of signaling like, hey, the DMA is bad. This is hurting consumers. This is hurting small businesses. That feels like that's going to be their kind of consistent narrative all the way through. So, and I just want to highlight the fact that, we did come out with our own DMA policy statement before this blog post was published. And our take is essentially that any result in Google or any other gatekeeper, Microsoft should be subject to the same regulations with Bing, but any result that includes an entity interface featuring first-party data from that gatekeeper. So that's reviews that they've solicited from users directly on their own platform, photos, business photos, business descriptions, anything that features data that is unique to that gatekeeper, that should absolutely be subject to self-preferencing regulation. It is their own property, whether or not it exists on a different Google subdomain like maps.google.com or whatever, flights.google.com. Any entity result that features first-party data should absolutely be subject to the DMA and other regulations like it. So,
well, Google consolidated all its subdomains into
That's right.
google.com
Well,
/ for data purposes
Right.
in response to the EU to say, oh, well, this is all just part of the same thing.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
But then, kept entities sharing data with all of these other properties, right? So even though they've sort of siloed their domains, parent compliance move, they haven't siloed their data, as David points out. So this data is shared across everything, and
right.
that is the future of search, not a couple of links to solve a few problems. So
right. So obviously this is a continuing story, and we're going to be very closely involved with it. And as David said, we're looking to do more research in Europe on user behavior to see how these changes are impacting people. So
If they are impacting people.
If they are yes, if they are impacting people.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.